Welcome, everybody. My name is Larry Hoffheimer, and I am the chairman and founder of the Macular Degeneration Association. We have a very interesting program today, and I welcome all of you. I also want to, before I go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsors, which includes Regeneron, Apellis, Iveric Bio, MacuHealth, Nodal Vision, for their support in helping to produce these programs. The Macular Degeneration Association has grown tremendously over the years, and we have a very large following, and I recommend all of you to visit our website, which is macularhope, HOPE, .org, to see the future programs we have, both virtual programs like today, as well as live programs, which we conduct all over the country. The Macular Degeneration Association is a charitable 501c3 nonprofit foundation. MDA has been around now for about 12 years, and it has been a very successful program. And I know we have with us Dr. Jeffrey Gerson, who's our medical director, and we have two very interesting speakers. One of whom is going to be our first speaker is going to be Dr. Pamela Weber. She's going to talk about biologics, biosimilars, and generics in retina for patients. So, Dr. Weber, I welcome you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Donna, for inviting me to speak today for the Macular Degeneration Association. So this topic I find very interesting because I think it's confusing to the patients, and I think nobody really ever explains this to the patients. And I think it's going to come up either in your treatment for retinal disease or even possibly in your treatment for other diseases. So I want to try to clarify this for everyone so you have some idea. You may have to choose between a biologic, a biosimilar, or a generic, or your doctor may be choosing and you may want to know why and what the differences are, or your insurance company may be choosing. So that's another really good reason to have some idea of what's going on with this and what we mean by these terms. So we'll start with a biologic. A biologic is a genetically engineered protein derived from a living organism, and it's used to treat a disease. So these tend to be very large molecules, large proteins that perform various functions within the organism. So let me just backtrack a little bit. So you may wonder what a protein is. So when we have a protein, when the body tries to design one, we need a roadmap. And that roadmap to make a protein is called a gene sequence. And that comes from the DNA in the cells in our body. So here we have it. We have our DNA roadmap, which gets switched to another roadmap called RNA. And then that gets read as protein, and the protein serves certain functions within the body. So again, going back to a biologic, it's a genetically engineered protein derived from a living organism that is used to treat a disease. A gene sequence for the protein is identified. Then it's inserted into a host cell that acts as a protein factory. We go through this very complex manufacturing, and then the protein is cleaned up so that it is safe for human use. So a biologic takes a long time to create for several reasons. First of all, you have to have a brilliant scientist who comes up with the idea, and then it has to be tested, and it goes through extensive testing, and then it has to be created, and then finally brought to market. So this can take 10 to 15 years, lots and lots of science, lots of drug company involvement, and it costs a tremendous amount of information. So when you think about the cost of developing all these biologics that we have, it's mind-boggling. So it can be 1.2 up to $5 billion. And for a biologic to be used in practice, It has to go through this rigorous FDA approval. So again, what we have, we start with our DNA. We figure out what DNA we need. We put this into a vector, which may be a virus or a yeast or something. We inject that into a host cell, which acts as a multiplication system, and we get expansion of the cell. We then get the protein out of the cells, clean up this protein, humanize it, purify it, and then get it ready to be given out as a medication. So it's multiple steps, very high tech. Okay. So you may have already been treated with a biologic. I listed all the biologics that we currently have here. And so Macogen was one of the first ones that was developed for the use of neovascular AMD, or what we call wet AMD. And wet AMD is when you have drusen, and on top of that, you have abnormal blood vessels growing underneath the retina that can leak and ooze into the retina and cause the vision to drop very precipitously. So Macogen was a pretty good drug. It was the beginning. Before that, we had nothing. So it was really good. We could save several eyes, but it was a little bit of a weaker of the anti-VEGFs. And then Avastin came along, which was actually developed for cancer treatment. But we started injecting into the eye and found that was really quite powerful to be used for numerous diseases of the retina, all vascular type diseases such as neovascular AMD, diabetic macular edema, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, central retinal vein occlusion. So Avastin has vast use in the retina. A third one that came along was Lucentis, which was also approved for use for macular degeneration, all forms of diabetes, myopia, and vein occlusions. And again, this seemed to be a little bit better than the Avastin. And then we moved on to Eylea, which many of you may be getting now. Eylea is a very, very great drug. And again, it's used for multiple vascular problems within the retina. And then Beovu came along, and it seemed really good for some patients, but it had a lot of inflammation. And so its use sort of got curtailed. I don't think too many doctors are using it, though with the right patient in the right situation, it was extremely effective. Vabysmo came along. You may have seen the ads on TV. They're really pushing it. And Vabysmo is a great drug. I did a lot of the clinical testing for a lot of these drugs, but Vabysmo is the one I most currently did, and I'm still working on it in phase 4 studies. But Vabysmo is a wonderful drug. It hits VEGF, it blocks VEGF and also Ang2, so it's quite powerful. And some of the patients can go long periods of time in between injections. Now on TV, the only thing my patients ever hear is that it's 4 months, but only about 40% of the patients make it 4 months. But I am using it a lot. I think it's a great drug. And it is approved for neovascular AMD, diabetic macular edema, diabetic retinopathy, but not yet vein occlusion. Now, Syfovre is a really interesting drug that hit the market pretty recently. And Syfovre is used for geographic atrophy, which is another form of macular degeneration. Macular degeneration is pretty complex. We talk about dry and we talk about wet, and then we have subdivisions of each of these. And one of the subdivisions of dry is what we call geographic atrophy. And in that situation, patches of cells just die and thin out. And it's almost like, I always say to my patients, it's like Swiss cheese vision, where you're just missing pieces. And this drug blocks complement, which is known to play a very important role in causing the disease. And what's interesting about the drug is it slows down the progression of the loss, but doesn't improve vision. So what we're trying to do with our patients now is start them early. You know, I'm eager to get patients onto Syfovre once I see that they have patchy geographic atrophy, especially if they're 20/40 or better. because we don't want to lose that good vision. And hopefully we can keep this good vision going until a better drug comes along. So let's move on to biosimilars. So biosimilars are versions of brand name biologics that may offer more affordable treatment options to patients. They need to be reverse engineered, and they are slightly different from the biologic, but only in areas that don't change the desired effectiveness. Biosimilars take about 5 to 9 years to develop. And the reason for that is because they're working off a drug that's already been discovered. So we don't have to go through that whole discovery phase. And we know what we're looking for. We know the genetic material. And of course, biosimilars aren't created unless we know there's good clinical results. So, so for the biosimilars, the drug companies watch and look and see what's really working. And then they start to create a similar molecule, but it can't be exactly the same. So because there's not all this development costs, it's much cheaper to develop this drug. And it only costs about, well, it's still extremely high, $100 million, but that's a lot cheaper than $2 billion. Now, biosimilars are carefully monitored by the FDA, and they do require FDA approval before they go to market. So why biosimilars? If we have a drug that works, why create something that's a little different? Well, by creating these, we can keep the cost of the drug down. And so there's cost reduction. And as you know, our medical system is pretty overwhelmed with costs right now because all the treatments that we offer are expensive, whether it's for your retina or for your cancer or for whatever. The prices are just escalating out of control. So the government and insurance companies are very interested in trying to figure out ways of cutting, medical costs so that more people can benefit from these eye vision saving and life saving drugs. So it's speculated that between 2020 and 2024, the US healthcare system could save $100 billion by using biosimilars. So you can see there's a huge push for pharmaceutical companies to create these and for doctors to start using these. And as I said before, it may make more treatment available to underinsured individuals, which is so terribly important. All FDA-approved biosimilars undergo a rigorous evaluation so that doctors and patients can be confident of the safety, effectiveness, and the quality of these products. So I use, biosimilars, of course. And one of the ones our first one that got approved in retina was Cimerli. And the full name is Cimerli ranibizumab, EGRN. And there's 2 doses, 0.5 milligrams and 0.3. And so this is very, very similar to Lucentis 0.5 and Lucentis 0.3. And it's about 30% cheaper to use Cimerli versus Lucentis. And it is approved for wet AMD, diabetic macular edema, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which is abnormal blood vessels growing out of the retina. It's a more advanced form of diabetic eye disease. Retinal edema associated with vein occlusion. That's when the veins get clogged and the blood backs up into the retina. And choroidal neovascularization associated with myopia. In other words, abnormal blood vessels that grow in a very nearsighted eye. And the efficacy and safety were studied in multi-center studies involving centers in the US and Europe. So again, these are extremely well studied. I have no problem, adding them to my armamentarium to treat more patients and to keep certain insurance companies happy. Another one that just recently became available is BioViz. And this is a biosimilar, and it got FDA approved in September of 21. It's also very similar to Lucentis 0.5, but priced about 40% lower. So huge, huge savings. Now, BioViz, interestingly, they only did the one concentration. They didn't do the 0.3, which is what we commonly use for diabetes. So the use of BioViz is a little more limited, but it compared very well to the safety and the efficacy of Lucentis. And this is manufactured by a drug company called Biogen. So yeah, as I said before, it is approved for wet AMD or neovascular AMD, diabetic macular edema, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, of course, but you'd have to use the higher dose, retinal edema associated with retinal vein occlusion, and corneal neovascularization associated with myopia. So we have two good drugs that we can use in exchange for our biologics. Let's see. So again, when we look at biosimilars and compare them to biologics, so the analytic work on the is heavier on the bottom of the biosimilars, because they're looking and watching and seeing which drugs are really successful and which are really being used within the marketplace and are having good clinical results, not just after the phase 3 studies, but in practice. So there's a lot of analytics going into that and looking to see which drugs are worth them investing their millions of dollars in to create a biosimilar from a biologic. The preclinical testing can be a little bit larger for the biosimilars. The clinical pharmacology is definitely bigger for the biologics because, again, it's a new drug, new invention, and it has to be very carefully created and monitored. And then the clinical studies are much larger for biologics. The FDA allows the biosimilars to pull some of the information from the clinical studies from the biologics. So less studying is done and it can get to market a lot faster than the biologics. So what is a generic? Generic drugs are synthesized from chemicals, whereas biologics and biosimilars are manufactured from living organisms. When a patent expires on a brand name drug, a similar chemical compound can be marketed. The generics are smaller molecules than biologics and biosimilars. Generics are commonly used for topical medications. So these are not injected into the eye like all the ones I just discussed, but rather these are topicals. In other words, eye drops. They're super common, especially in glaucoma, infections, inflammation, and dry eye. So there's generics for pretty much every brand name drug in these areas. And interestingly, excuse me, my throat's a little dry. The drug companies can switch you to a generic without even asking you. So that can be a bit of a problem. But in general, the generics work pretty well. And there can be huge cost savings to the patient. However, patients need to be monitored because it's possible they won't get the same result. They take only about 2 years to develop and cost about $2 million, so much cheaper. So again, generics tend to be these small molecules. Biosimilars tend to be a little bit smaller, and then biologics tend to be quite large molecules. And the biologics and the biosimilars are made from living cells. So again, when we kind of look at a roadmap of how these medications are developed, it all starts with discovery. We have to have a great scientist come along and figure this out. Then it has to be developed. Non-clinical studies have to be done in order to figure out how to make the drug and create a drug that can go into clinical studies. And so then we start our phase 1 study, which is a safety study, and it usually involves just a handful of patients, maybe 20 patients. And it's usually short, maybe just a couple months. Once safety is determined, then we go on to phase 2, and phase 2 is a little longer. Excuse me. Phase 2 is usually about 100 patients, and it takes about, maybe a year. And then the phase 3 can involve, 600 patients, and that usually takes about 3 years to do. So the biosimilars are on the line below, and you can see that it's a much shorter course and much fewer clinical studies. And then on the very bottom, we see our generics, which is the shortest course of all, and of course, the least expensive. So in conclusion, the biologic use is expanding rapidly in retina, as well as all across medicine. The biosimilars are safe and effective. They increase access to potential sight-saving treatments and potentially lower medical costs. Generics can also be beneficial to many patients in reducing the cost of chronic treatment with eye drops. They are also safe and effective for most patients. Thank you. Yeah, so the first question is, will your doctor automatically change you to one of these? You would have to sign a consent form, so you're going to know. At least for the biologics and the biosimilars. For the generic eye drops, you might not know. The doctor might not know either. It can happen within the pharmacy. Which would be the best for treatment of wet AMD? Honestly, I think Vabysmo is probably going to be the best. But a lot of times your doctor will start you, sometimes the insurance companies make you start Avastin and take 3 Avastins. And if that doesn't work, move you to the next level up, which is often Eylea. And then if that doesn't work, Vabysmo. How would you know which one to use? Well, honestly, if it looks like a really complex lesion, with a lot of bleeding, I might want to go straight to Vabysmo. If the patient has been on Eylea and doing well, I would keep the patient on Eylea. So a lot of it depends. Some patients do absolutely great on Avastin, and there's no reason to switch them over. So it's kind of, it's a little bit cookbook. We see, we can really see how patients are doing because we have, wonderful ways of studying patients with OCT and fluorescein angiography. So we don't miss anything. So we can really gather lots of data and figure out what would be the best approach and which would be the best drug. My mother was advised to try Syfovre, but the side effects scared her so much she doesn't want to try it. Can you comment on that? She has geographic atrophy and dry AMD and has lost all central vision as well as seeing colors. Yeah, so one thing we have noted with Syfovre is that the chances of intraocular inflammation are pretty low. And when it does happen, it's not that bad. So I've had one patient who had this inflammation, which is kind of like being allergic to the drug. But we could just stop it and wait for the next drug to come along. I think in general, it's pretty safe, because, we're so good at giving these eye injections. It's such a tiny, tiny little needle that the risk of a retinal tear or retinal detachment are very, very low. I mean, I haven't seen one in years. And infection is also very low. Again, I haven't seen infection in years. So in general, I feel if the patient is cooperative, it's super well tolerated. Most of my patients don't feel anything. If they feel anything, it's like pulling out a hair and it lasts just that long. So I'm pretty aggressive with the Syfovre management. I think patients will do well. I think what's hard about it is you have to keep, like with wet AMD, we can see how you're doing. Sometimes we can give you a break. Some patients only need a few injections. It just depends on the patient. But with Syfovre, we just keep going. So you get an injection every 2 months, maybe even monthly, and you just keep going. There's no endpoint. The endpoint is kind of waiting for the next better drug to come along. So now your mother really has low vision, and she, I guess with her having lost so much already, she's not the perfect candidate. However, if she feels like she's still losing, then I would start her on probably one eye. You could do both, but that's quite a commitment. So I might start on the better eye, which with the eye that seems to have less of the atrophy, and one that the patient seems to be doing better with. So if she still feels like she's losing, I would recommend starting. If she feels like she's not losing and then it's just bad and it's been bad and that's the way it is, then maybe it's not the right drug choice for her. Okay. Is generics good enough to use when you have wet AMD? So we don't, so I guess the closest generic chemical creation is not there for wet AMD. We don't have any topical medications. So I think that the biosimilars are good enough, but they are injected. It's not an eye drop. But there is no generic that's an eye drop for AMD yet. We can cross our fingers and hope it happens eventually. Okay, what if you start with a generic and it doesn't work and the insurance work? Will the insurance cover the change? Yes, usually the doctor can write a letter and say that he or she has given a trial, the medication is not working and it needs to be changed, and they should change it at that point. If they still don't, you can a doctor can ask for a doctor review, and then it's a lot of phone calls and everything else, but usually we can make that work. So you don't have to stay on a drug that's not helping you. Would low vision glasses help my mother at this stage of the disease? They're so expensive, which is a drawback. Yeah, there's lots and lots of low vision aids available. I have quite a few on my website. I have a section which is island-retina.com. We can add this in the footnotes of this meeting. One thing that we have had quite success with is eSight, and eSight is crazy expensive, but they do work out. And I'm not involved in the company at all. I don't get any, I'm not on the board or anything like that. But they do have some sort of rental program. The patients really love it. They are really expensive. But if it makes your life better, it might be worth, selling the car and buying the low vision glasses. It's a tough situation. If you're legally blind, then the Lighthouse will step in and provide low vision aids for you. So if she's 2,200 or less, she should go through the Lighthouse and they will evaluate her and get her into some low vision aids. Is insurance covering the new injectable for geographic atrophy? Yes, certainly Medicare is. Some of the commercials are lagging a little bit behind, but if you have Medicare, you're all set.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Weber.
Thank you.
I'd like to go on to our next subject. That is the importance of early detection of wet AMD. This is a device that our next speaker, Dr. Megan Blemker, is going to discuss. I've used it myself, and it does show early signs of wet, which with the new anti-VEGF drugs that are out there, the injections, it can really slow down the progression. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Megan Blemker, who will talk about the important role of early detection. Dr. Blemker.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Notal Vision is proud to partner with the Macular Degeneration Association, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. It is such a privilege. To reiterate some of the important points made in the presentation, I would like to further discuss understanding the importance of early detection of wet AMD and how you can play a role in protecting your vision. 4C Home is FDA cleared and Medicare covered, and prescribed by your eye care professional when appropriate level of vision and stage of AMD. It is a form of personalized medicine with the 4C Home device used at home in between your regular eye exams. It detects metamorphopsia or visual distortions in AMD. AMD, or age-related macular degeneration, is the leading cause of severe central vision loss in people over the age of 50 years in the United States. I'm going to share with you the information you need to get informed and take charge of your vision. AMD is a chronic, meaning it does not resolve or go away, progressive, meaning that it tends to worsen over time, type of condition. And there are two types of AMD, dry and wet. Dry AMD is the slower changing, earlier form of the disease that puts you at risk for developing wet AMD. Wet AMD is the sudden change or advanced form of the disease. AMD affects an area of the retina called the macula, which is responsible for detailed central vision used for activities like reading, driving, and seeing faces clearly. In dry AMD, changes occur in the cells of the macula, and drusen, or deposits, build up in this area. These changes may induce blurry vision, such as difficulty seeing sharp details, both up close and from a distance. Dry AMD is the slow form of the disease with changes you may not even notice over time. Most importantly, dry AMD puts you at an increased risk of progressing to wet AMD. Over time, the size and number of these deposits can increase, which increases your risk of developing the more sight-threatening form, wet AMD. Again, dry AMD can suddenly change to wet AMD without any advance notice. If you convert to wet AMD, abnormal blood vessels grow under and into the retina in the macula. These blood vessels leak fluid and can sometimes bleed without any warning. You may not notice changes until significant vision loss has occurred. If you convert to wet AMD, significant vision loss can be rapid and severe. Symptoms of wet AMD include distortion, or straight lines that look wavy, and dark spots in the center of your vision, or generalized blurry vision, as you see here on the screen. Unlike dry AMD, there are effective treatments for wet AMD, but these treatments are most effective when administered early on before symptoms are noticed and vision loss has occurred. These treatments can halt or slow the progression of wet AMD, but they cannot restore vision that has already been lost. Once the wet disease starts, it will continue to advance until you receive treatment. Irreversible damage can occur within days to weeks and before symptoms are noticed. But how early is early detection? Once symptoms of visual impairment are noticed, those wavy lines or dark spots appear, then vision loss may have already occurred. The earlier you catch wet AMD, the better chance you have of preserving your vision and your independence. So, wet AMD treatments are most effective when the disease is caught early. 4C Home is an early warning system for your eyes. You use this device at home in between your regular eye exams. It helps people with dry AMD detect wet AMD before you even notice that visual changes have occurred. But how does it work? Well, you take a simple daily test that checks for tiny changes in your vision, and this test takes just a few minutes per eye per day. Data from each test is sent to your eye doctor as well as the Notal Vision Monitoring Center, the medical provider of 4C Home. If a change in test scores is detected, the monitoring center alerts your doctor. Your doctor's office will then contact you directly to schedule a follow-up visit. The AMSR Grid was developed in the 1940s and has long been recommended as a simple and accessible tool you can use from home to monitor for changes in your vision. However, by the time you notice vision distortions on the AMSR Grid, significant vision loss may have already occurred. Fortunately, new technology, such as the 4C Home AMD monitoring program, has been developed to detect tiny changes before symptoms are noticed and reports them to your doctor so you can receive immediate examination and treatment. Testing with 4C Home is easy. You turn on the device and look into the viewfinder to begin testing. A bump will briefly appear and then disappear. Use the mouse provided to click where the bump appeared and return to the center dot. Data from each test is sent to the Notal Vision Monitoring Center for evaluation and then provided to your eye doctor. Regular at-home monitoring is like brushing your teeth. It's a good, healthy habit you do every day to help preserve your vision. 4C Home allows you to take a proactive approach to protecting your vision. A clinical partner will be with you every step of the way. After the Notel Vision Monitoring Center receives a referral form from your doctor, we will answer any questions, verify coverage, and ship your device. Once you receive the device, the Notel Vision Monitoring Center will walk you through setup and training. You and your doctor will continue to receive feedback from the Notel Vision Monitoring Center. Our team will be sure to verify your insurance benefits and discuss with you prior to your acceptance of the device and getting started with the program. There are low out-of-pocket costs for Medicare patients. Patients with Medicare and a secondary supplement plan could have out-of-pocket costs as low as $0 per month. Patients with Medicare and no secondary supplement plan will pay around $15 per month once their yearly Medicare fee-for-service Part B deductible is met. Your doctor will send our Notel Vision Monitoring Center the referral order for you to begin the 4C Home AMD monitoring program. Appropriate candidates have a particular stage of dry AMD and vision level, which are determined by your doctor. You will continue to test regularly at home. If a change takes place, your doctor will be alerted and have you come in for examination. In summary, the Notel Vision Monitoring Center works with your doctor to remotely monitor your dry AMD, helping you retain functional vision throughout your AMD journey. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the Q&A. I see some questions coming in. The first one is, how soon will this system pick up the change? So the way that 4C Home works is that there is artificial intelligence, and the design of the technology uses something called hyper acuity. So this is part of your visual system that is about 10 times more sensitive than the visual acuity or the letters that you see on the chart in an eye exam. So it's much more sensitive than what you might notice on a daily basis. Another way to look at this is that we took a peek at the patients who are involved in a registry. So this is a lot of data from all of the eye doctors across the country who are not using 4C Home. They are just using standard of care alone. So they're going in for regular eye exams. They may be recommended nutraceuticals or vitamins, and then they're calling their doctors whenever they see a change in their vision. So this is the current standard of care. They may or may not be using that Amsler grid as well, that piece of paper with the grid lines. And so what we found was that most patients who are doing all of that but not using 4C Home, only about a third of them are coming in with driving level of vision, which you hear us describe as 20/40. So usually the smaller the number, the better the vision. Well, if you add 4C Home to that standard of care, all those things that I just described, then over 80% of patients are at that functional level of vision, that 20/40 or better. So that's where that early detection really comes into play with home monitoring. This acts like a safety net in between your regular eye exams with your eye care provider. The next question is, do all insurance companies cover this? So this is Medicare, traditional Medicare covered, which will take care of the 80% of the monthly monitoring fee for the service. And then if you have a secondary or supplemental insurance, that typically picks up the other 20%. What happens whenever you are identified as a good candidate for 4C Home? So you have to have a certain level of vision, and you have to have that intermediate dry stage of AMD noted on your examination. So if you're a good candidate and your doctor refers you to 4C Home, then what happens from there is our patient financial services team goes through your insurance, Medicare, and any supplements you might have, and will let you know what, if anything, that you might have to pay on a monthly basis before we ever ship you the device. And there's no obligation. So it's something that we will educate you about and let you make the decision about moving forward. But most of our patients don't pay anything out of pocket. If our patients do have that secondary or that 20% that doesn't cover, then it's about $15 per month on average nationally for patients. But again, we'll make sure we go through all of that with you before we ever ship the device to your door. Next is, do I have to go through my doctor or can I reach out to you to get it? So this does require a prescription from your eye care provider. So if you're not on this currently and you would like to know more about it, I would talk to your eye doctor and have them evaluate you, see if you fit the criteria for being a good candidate for 4C Home. Next is what happens if my doctor doesn't have this or is a member of this. It's very easy for your doctor to sign up to be a referring provider for 4C Home. So if they don't have it, then you are welcome to talk with them about it. They're welcome to reach out to me or to any member of our team. We have on our website lots of information about getting started on 4chome.com. So they're welcome to use any of those resources. We have a doctor portion and a patient portion on our website, so you're welcome to view that as well. Next is, do you have a list of doctors that prescribe this? Actually, we do have on our website, that same 4chome.com, it is Find a Doctor tab. So you would just click on that, and then you'd be able to put in your location, and it should be able to find some docs in your area that are currently referring partners with 4C Home. An anonymous attendee says or asks, are there false readings? If so, does insurance pay for it? So this is a great question. As with any technology, any diagnostic, any screening test, there are false readings. And so systems are designed to be very sensitive so that we don't miss any disease. And as far as the alerts or that notification to your doctor that something has potentially changed with your distortion or your metamorphopsia over time, then when the alert is sent to your referring doctor, your eye care provider, they're able to bring you in for examination. Now, on average, patients will get one alert every 4 years. So if you happen to have an alert, then your eye doctor will ask you to come in for an examination. They will evaluate you, and then your eye exam and whatever testing that needs to be performed by your eye doctor that's done that day should fall under a typical eye examination as far as coding and billing according to your insurance, like it usually does. So the service fee and the monitoring for 4C Home is separate from when you go in to see your eye doctor and the way that they bill for your eye exam. Next is, can anyone use this even if you have arthritis in your hands? Again, another great question. So as I'd mentioned before, there's no obligation, there's no contract with this monitoring service. So if you happen to have a condition where it's difficult for you to use your hand, arthritis or a tremor or a head tremor or any other type of situation where it might make it a little bit more challenging for you to work with 4C Home and to be able to perform the test and click on the mouse, then we can certainly ship you the device to give it a try. And then we will take care of the shipping if you'd like to return it, if it's something that just doesn't end up being compatible for you. So absolutely worth a shot, and absolutely will take care of the shipping to and from if we need to, as far as that's concerned. Next one says, I have priority Medicare and they continue to decline to cover the 4C Home machine. I've appealed without results. Why isn't this covered? Another excellent question. I absolutely am not the insurance expert at the monitoring center, but I will be happy to look into this. With your permission, I will talk to my patient financial services team and we'll see if we can get you a little bit better answer. So don't want to speak out of turn before looking into the case in a little bit more detail.